Hi everyone, this is Lars McKenzie from the Instructional Design team at Simmons University. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to create effective slides for your classes. Slides are a primary way that instructors communicate information to students, and most of us have never been taught how to create slides in a way that actually captures student attention and fosters learning. Slides are a visual aid to support a lecture, but often instructors use slides to serve multiple purposes, as a handout, a lecture script, an archival record of a class or meeting session, and as a visual aid. Trying to squish all of these functions into one presentation tool ends up leaving you with slides that look like this. And we'll get more in depth into what's going on in this slide in a little bit in this presentation. In today's video, I'm going to go over some of the common mistakes that instructors make when designing slides and show you some tips for making your information delivery clearer. We'll discuss the problems with traditional slide design, creating effective slides and slide decks from your existing materials, and accessibility, color, and design systems. In this presentation, I will also be modeling some of the best practices for creating effective and engaging slide decks. So as part of that, I'm going to kind of break character a little bit and zoom up to the meta level to talk about this slide that you're looking at here. So this is our agenda slide. You'll see this slide repeated in a few points during the presentation. I use an agenda slide to track progress through a presentation. So let's just break down some of the elements of this slide. What are we looking at on the screen here? At the most fundamental level, we have 5 visual elements. We have an opening curly brace. We have a closing curly brace. We have 3 shapes on the screen. One is highlighted in this blue color, and these other 2 are kind of gray. There's a visual system going on here. I stated verbally that we are going to start with problems with traditional slide design, and that's actually visually confirmed to you. One, by the virtue of that agenda item coming first, appearing on the left-hand side of your screen. And it's also highlighted a different color than the gray. This element is sort of in focus. We then have these other 2 grayed out elements. I've indicated that we'll be getting to those later, and you can tell because they come to the right or after the first element that we're talking about. Besides just color and order, these agenda blocks actually signify time as well. So you can probably tell that the first block and the last block are pretty equivalent in size. The middle block, in contrast, is almost double the size of either of the first or the last blocks. And this is to visually signify that this middle section, the creating effective slides and slide decks from your existing materials, is going to take up the majority of this presentation today. Anything that you put on your slide, viewers are going to try to make some meaning out of. If, for instance, that wasn't true, if the biggest part of this talk was actually problems with traditional slide design, this slide could be potentially confusing to viewers. We see that there's some sort of visual system going on here, and our minds are interpreting this visual system and trying to make meaning out of it. So I just wanted to bring this up, one, to show you that there are pretty simple ways that you can indicate meaning in your slides just by creating different length shapes or different color shapes, but that meaning is going to be interpreted by students. So if you are sort of randomly assigning these things, it can get confusing pretty quickly. To create this slide, all I did was draw 3 shapes, give them a little bit of color with the fill tool, and found these curly brace icons as a piece of clip art in PowerPoint. You'll see when we go through the presentation, I'm going to be reusing this as a repeating motif as a way to track progress through the presentation. I'll also provide you with a template of a slide deck with some common layouts that you can use. You can access all of the resources referenced in this tutorial, as well as this slide deck, in the description of this video. Let's take another look at that congested slide. How can we improve it? The first thing that you'll probably notice is that we have a lot of text on the screen. This slide may be functioning as a teleprompter or a script for a live lecture, or it could be the primary information mechanism for an online course that doesn't have any supplementary lectures Slides are not particularly good at conveying information at this density. Slides are a multimedia tool, and to use them to their best potential, we need to start thinking about the space of a slide, not just as an area to add a bulleted list of text. It isn't really your fault if you find yourself creating slides that look a lot like that What is Python slide. If you take a look at the basic template for a PowerPoint slide, this probably looks pretty familiar to you, right? So there's a spot where you can add a title and a spot where you can add text. And actually, you can see that where it says click to add text, there's a bullet mark already started there for you. So there's an encouragement to create a list of text. What else could go in this section here? I mean, we have some suggestions. There's a few icons here of a chart, an image, but often instructors don't really know what to put in here, especially when a lot of the information that they want to convey is textual. So we're going to actually just dive in and figure out what else can go in this body space, and actually what else can go in this title space as well. Okay, so that concluded the problems with traditional slide design section of this tutorial. We're moving into creating effective slides and slide decks from your existing materials. I just want to note that the blue color has shifted, so we're now in the middle section of the talk. We have a visual indicator that this is going to be a longer section than the previous one, so if you feel like you need to take a break, get up, get some water, stretch, now would be a good time to pause the video. I also want to note that when we're visually tracking progress through a presentation, kind of gives you a little bit of that excitement, endorphin, a little hit in your brain where you can feel like you've accomplished something. Even if you're just watching along to this lecture, you can feel movement. And that's a really powerful and positive thing to include in your classes, to have tasks that you can check off and accomplishments that you can mark. I'm going to use the assertion evidence method to tidy up that What is Python slide. You might be able to see how I use that basic slide template to create this slide here. I'm using this space to add a title to create an assertion about whatever I want to talk about in this slide. So let's go back and visit this slide again. I have gone through and highlighted what I think is the most important point on this original slide. It's the second bullet point. It is interpreted, high level, and general purpose, meaning that it doesn't need to compile, it is more human readable, and it can be used in a variety of contexts. I think it's sort of the most complex point, and it also really gets to some of the deeper level understanding that I think students should have. One of the most important things we can do to improve student learning in creating slides is to remove extraneous information. Removing extraneous information is going to allow students to not only remember what you taught them 30 seconds from now, 10 minutes from now, an hour from now, but also to apply that knowledge to a different context. Now we have a clean slide that draws your students' attention to your key points and helps them retain this information better, and also hopefully applying it to their understanding and integrating it into what they already know. So let's just break this down here. We still have this title for the assertion. This is our assertion here. Python is a great language to learn for first-time programmers. And as you'll notice, that was nowhere on this original slide, that assertion. So how did I get to that assertion? Well, I looked at this evidence that I wanted to use. That's the second bullet point, where the quote really is that Python is interpreted, high level, and general purpose. That's my evidence. And my assertion is that each of these factors make it a great language to learn for first-time programmers. Now, this slide, of course, is emphasizing just that one bullet point that we identified. It pulled away extraneous information about the year that Python was invented or released, some of the syntax, some of the philosophy. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that as an instructor, you remove those points from a lecture about Python. Maybe you still find them valuable to bring up, but they don't all need to be displayed on your slide. And that's a really crucial difference here. Here's another example of a potential slide design. This one we have the same assertion, but we have an even more digested list of key terms to direct our students' attention towards. So we have just testing, readability, and range of use. Those are the three keywords that I want students to remember when I tell them that this is a good first language for them to learn. Now, I want to just draw your attention to a few things on this slide. I'm using more visual elements to not only decorate the slide to make it more visually appealing, but also to convey some meaning. So each key term is sort of underlined by this arrow kind of element. The check marks signify that this is a list of items. Maybe each item is a requirement that we're looking for in a great first programming language. They also signal that these are positive attributes. By having a check mark, it's saying this is something that we want to have. So there's a lot of meaning being conveyed by these visuals, even though this is a very simple visualization. We also have this sort of decorative circle element which ties all of the items together. It presents them as a unit, and it really balances the page out as well. Your eye is going to be drawn to anything large or bright on the screen, so immediately the circle draws your eye down to the list of requirements right away. And that's exactly what I want. So what does it mean to powerfully point? This is a question that a great instructional designer and Fandry posed in a similar type of presentation. We have here an overview of a fictional slide deck that I put together where every single slide is laid out almost exactly the same way. We have some common elements here that I see a lot in faculty slide decks. So the title for each of these slides is Topic A, Part 1, Topic A, Part 2, Topic A, Part 3. We're giving subject headings to each slide and then just a list of information. When we do this, it's really hard to understand what's important in this lecture. If you are using PowerPoint to point at important concepts, but you're pointing at everything that you're covering in this topic, you're almost pointing at nothing. If you point at everything, you're pointing at nothing. So we have a little bit of an improvement here. So there's a few things that I really like about this slide deck. One, there's consistency. We have a title slide. We have our agenda slide that repeats throughout the presentation so we can track our progress. We have a summary slide at the end that's going to wrap up what we learned. We then also have some repeating layout. I have my assertion evidence method slide that has this blue banner as the title color and then some text and an image. This is sort of repeated here, but there's no image, but it's a very similar look throughout. Everything is very consistent and tied together. A consistent layout where you're using similar elements throughout the presentation. You're not changing up slide decks between presentations over the course of the semester, using the same one every time. It's going to really help students hook on to the meaning of different motifs. So if they always know that a slide with the most important point looks like slide number 6 here, it's going to be really easy for them to understand the points that you're trying to convey. Anything you can do to reduce the cognitive load of interpreting your message to students is going to help them learn more deeply. So I would really recommend either using this template if you want to use this template, or using your own template, but making sure that it's consistent each week of your class. Awesome. Now that concludes the creating effective slides and slide decks from your existing materials section, and we are on to our final section, accessibility, color, and design systems. So the first piece that I want to talk about in this section is about using predefined layouts to reduce the amount of work that you'll have to do later to ensure that students who use a screen reader can access your slides. So this image here is a screenshot of some starter templates from Google Slides that you could choose to apply to your slides to help you lay out your text and your images and your titles and everything you want to put into a slide. Most of these slide designs, except for the blank one, have areas to add text. These text boxes are set up so that screen readers can access them and read the information that's inside of them out loud to a screen reader user. Where you get into some trouble is when you add your own text box. So if you are using this blank template down here and you decide, I'm just going to design this the way I want, I'll add a text box for the title, I'll add a text box for the body, and I'll just type away. Any text box that you create is not going to be immediately accessible to a screen reader. You can, however, make it accessible to a screen reader, but it's going to take an extra step for you to do it. One, I want to encourage you to use these existing templates so that you don't have to go through this extra step, but I also want to talk to you about this extra step because it's something that you will need to do for images that you add. So the way that documents communicate with screen readers is through what we call alternative or alt text. You can add alt text to any element in your slide by simply right-clicking on it. So if you right-click, we'll see a menu that gives you the option to edit or add alt text, and PowerPoint will actually give you a little bit of guidance on how to do this. So they'll suggest writing 1 to 2 sentences describing what it is that you are adding alt text for. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of accessibility is using high contrast color combinations and left aligning your text. There are people who have a very hard time reading low contrast text. So text that's a very light color on a light background or a dark color on a dark background. So it's important that you use high contrast color combinations for accessibility. I have also included a link here for webaim.org/resources/contrast checker. And this is a great website where you can enter the hex codes for any colors and see if there's enough contrast. The second point in this slide is to please left align your text. I think it's certainly okay if you have a center aligned title for your slide or maybe a heading that's center aligned, but you really want to avoid center aligning any significant amount of text. And why is that? It's really hard to read center aligned text. We naturally want to go to the left-hand side of a paragraph and start reading from there. When you center align something, you're still reading from left to right, but the spot where the left starts, where the beginning of a sentence or the beginning of a line starts, varies because the center is what is aligning the paragraph. This just increases the cognitive lift that you're asking students to make by having them do something that goes against their natural way of reading. We often use center-aligned text to identify something that's important, and I've done that by center-aligning the element that this text is in, but left-aligning the text within the element. Okay, and finally, we're going to talk about design systems. This is a slide that I created to identify the style guide for this slide deck. And this is something that I like to do when I'm designing slide decks. I've defined what are the colors I'm going to use in this presentation. I have black text on white background. I have a highlight color, which you saw in the agenda slides as I move through it. I have an emphasis color. I would use that as like my main point background slide to really draw attention to something very important. I've also used this gray quite a bit. So these are my 5 colors that I used in this presentation. And I also have made decisions about typography. So I've used 2 fonts in this presentation, 1 font for my emphasis and my headings, and 1 font for my body text. You don't want to use any decorative fonts. So anything that looks a lot like handwriting or cursive. If you don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about which fonts to choose, Georgia is a great body text font. Another great one is Verdana. Trebuchet is a good one. Arial. Any of those kind of classic fonts are going to be very readable and great for your body text. So we've reached the end of this lesson, and I want to give you a quick summary of what we've learned today. Your slides are a visual communication tool, not a handout, a lecture script, or an archival document. Keep your slides consistent, concise, and accessible, and think outside the text box. Hopefully, I've given you some tips today to implement some of these ideas in your own slide deck. If you're interested in improving your slides, you've made a really great first step today. There's so much to learn about visual communication in teaching. I would highly recommend you checking out a book called Academic Slide Design. If you want to dig deeper into some more practical tips, it's a book that was written by Anne Fandry, who I mentioned earlier in this presentation, and I'll link to her book in the description of this video. I want to pose a challenge to you to try to implement one thing you learned. Take one slide and transform it. Use the assertion evidence method and turn it into something that is much more engaging for students. I would love to see what you come up with. So let me know what you did, show me if you want to, and let me know how the process went for you. Thank you so much for watching.